I never thought that Christmas, a day I'd once filled with magic and love, would end with me standing in the snow, invisible in my own family's home. There was no present for me under the tree, not even a card, just my daughter-in-law, Lacey, with a glass of mulled wine in one hand and a venomous smirk on her face. "You already have more than you deserve," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I watched my son Paul glance away. Not a word of defense, not even discomfort, just silence. And that silence hurt worse than anything. I looked around their beautifully decorated living room. The fireplace crackled, stockings hung with labels for everyone else, including their dog, Winston, but not me. The woman who gave up her husband's business to bankroll this perfect life. They lived now. The woman who spent 5 Thanksgivings sleeping on their pull-out couch so they could save on childcare. I swallowed hard, stood up slowly, and buttoned my coat with trembling fingers. "I think I'll head out," I said softly. No one moved. Lacey raised her glass like she was toasting my departure. "Enjoy the drive. Hope the roads aren't too icy." I didn't cry. God, I didn't even blink. Just walked to the door, picked up the bag of store-bought cookies I had brought. They hadn't even been opened, and left. The snow was falling thick and slow when I stepped outside. It clung to my lashes, but it couldn't disguise the heat rising in my chest. Not from the cold. Not from shame. From clarity. I drove home in silence, hands shaking the whole way. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even pray. I just replayed it over and over. Her voice, smug and sharp. My son, spineless and still. The rest of them, pretending I wasn't even there. But it wasn't the words that broke me. It was the way they all agreed without saying so. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't collapse into sobs. I didn't pace or drink or scream. I hung my coat, set the cookies on the kitchen counter, and sat at the small table by the window. Just sat there, staring out at the night, at the snowflakes swirling like they had nowhere to be. Like I didn't either. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't sad. Not really. I was done. Done being the afterthought. The free babysitter. The guilt-wrapped obligation they wheeled out for holidays and tax write-offs. I had become a coat rack with a pulse in their eyes. Useful, quiet, and better off unnoticed. I had given them everything. My late husband's business, my savings, my holidays, my health. And still, I was too much. Too much to be loved. Too much to be respected. But never too much to be used. I don't know how long I sat at that table. An hour, maybe more. But when I stood up, something inside me had shifted. Not broken. Rearranged. I walked over to the cabinet where I kept my old journals and pulled out the green one. The one from the year Richard died. Inside was a page he'd written on. A quote I used to skip over because it made me ache. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It means watching longer before choosing your strike. I stared at those words until the page blurred. Then I did the unthinkable. I opened my phone and deleted every photo from that night. Every smiling, staged lie. Then I opened a new note and wrote one sentence. "This was the last time I'll walk away feeling small." They thought they had silenced me, but they didn't know silence is where I build my strength. I spent most of that night staring at the ceiling. The apartment was cold in places I hadn't noticed before, like the floor under the dining table where my feet dangled, or the part of my chest that used to hold hope. But I didn't cry. Not once. The next morning, I woke up with swollen hands and stiff joints. Age was a funny thing. You get used to the aches, the creaks, the betrayals of your own body. What I hadn't realized until now was how much more painful it was to be betrayed by your heart. I made myself oatmeal, the kind Paul used to like as a kid, with raisins and cinnamon. I sat at the tiny round table in my kitchen and tried to eat, but it felt like swallowing regret. I glanced at the photo on my fridge. Paul at graduation, arms flung around Richard, both of them beaming. I'd been the one behind the camera, the one always behind. I got up. I opened the closet and pulled down the faded banker's box that held our old family photos. They smelled like dust and paper and memories I couldn't carry anymore. Weddings, birthdays, school plays, hospital visits. Every image felt like a debt no one intended to repay. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. At 10:15 a.m., I drove to the local historical archive, the same small brick building where I'd once donated Richard's military badges. The woman behind the counter, Gloria, recognized me. "Margaret," she said with a soft smile, "what brings you in?" "I have a donation," I told her, setting the box gently on the table like it held something fragile. "Family photographs, all dated, labeled. I want them to be remembered, even if not by those in them." She looked at me, then at the box, then back again. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "They don't know what they have. But maybe someday, someone else will look at these and see the love I gave." When I walked out of that archive, something stayed behind that had been heavy on my chest for too long. Not just the pictures, but the begging. The quiet, desperate hope that maybe next time they'd see me. Maybe next time I'd matter. There is no next time when people make a habit of your silence. I ended up at the park near the river. The wind was sharp, but I didn't care. I sat on a bench and just let it all surface. The Thanksgiving I spent making 3 separate meals because Lacey doesn't do gluten. The Christmas I paid for their tree because Paul said money was tight. The birthday where they forgot to call but posted a picture of a steak dinner. They said family was love, but what they meant was, family is what you owe us. And I'd been paying that bill for years, with no interest, no gratitude, just more demands. I closed my eyes. "I'm done," I whispered to the wind. Not a shout, not a vow, just the truth. The next morning was calm, too calm. It was the kind of quiet that made you realize how much noise you've been carrying just to feel connected. No texts, no voicemails, no false apologies wrapped in guilt, just stillness. I pulled on Richard's old sweater, soft and faded, with elbows worn thin, and walked down to the corner cafe for a coffee. Not because I needed the caffeine, but because I needed to do something for me. The woman behind the counter, Lily, always asked how my grandbabies were. This time, I smiled and said, "I think they're fine. I wouldn't really know." She blinked, then nodded, like she understood something deeper than she let on. After that, I walked through the neighborhood. The Christmas lights still glowed on every porch, but the sparkle didn't sting this time. Because I wasn't waiting to be welcomed anymore. I was done knocking on locked doors. I ended up back at the river park, drawn to the same bench, like it had something left to teach me. That's when I heard a soft, familiar voice behind me. "Margaret?" I turned and saw her, Irene, from church. She was wrapped in a thick coat and holding a paper bag of groceries. "I thought that was you," she said, walking over. "You okay?" I wanted to say I was fine. The default answer. But this time, I just shook my head. She didn't press. She just sat beside me, uninvited and welcome at the same time. "I've got an extra ham and nowhere to be for New Year's," she said after a while. "Come over. We'll cook too much, laugh a little, cry if we have to." I didn't realize how much I needed someone to say that. Not, "you should call them." Not, "they didn't mean it." Just an invitation that didn't come with conditions. We sat there until the cold numbed my fingers, and then she walked me back to my car, her hand gently steadying my elbow like I might crumble. Before we parted, she said something I'll never forget. "You know, Margaret, being kind doesn't mean letting people walk on you. Sometimes kindness is saying, 'Not anymore.'" I drove home slowly, her words echoing in my chest louder than any Christmas carol had in years. That night, I found the stack of unopened mail on my kitchen counter, mostly junk, a few bills, and one thick envelope from the attorney who handled Richard's estate. Inside was a reminder I had once been trusted to lead, to make decisions, to hold our future with clarity and courage. But somewhere along the way, I had handed all of that over in the name of family duty. Paul had asked me to sign those documents 2 years ago. "It's just for convenience, Mom," he said with that gentle urgency adult children use when they're rushing you into something. "You'll still be in control. It's just on paper." And I had believed him. I had believed that love meant trust, that family meant protection. But Irene's words shifted something. "Not anymore." I dug through my drawer until I found the copy of those documents. Power of attorney, financial transfer forms, things I hadn't looked at since I signed them. And suddenly, I didn't feel so sure anymore. I didn't sleep well that night. My mind kept circling back to every decision I'd made with my heart instead of my head. Every time I said yes to make peace, only to feel more invisible. By morning, I had a new plan. I called Irene. "Do you know a good lawyer?" There was a pause. Then her voice, calm and strong. "I know the best one. And she works pro bono for people who've been taken advantage of." I wrote down the name and address. It was time to stop letting silence protect people who didn't protect me. It was time to look at what I'd really signed away, and what I still had left to reclaim. I didn't bring much to the lawyer's office, just a manila envelope and a lifetime of being too agreeable. Her name was Angela Wu, and she couldn't have been more than 35. Sharp-eyed. No nonsense. The kind of woman who saw through pleasantries and straight into intent. She welcomed me in, offered tea, then flipped open the file like she already knew what she was going to find. "These were signed 2 years ago?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "Yes. My son said it was just estate simplification." I tried to smile like it didn't still embarrass me to say that out loud. Angela raised her brows. "Did you have your own legal representative present?" "No." "Did anyone explain the full scope of these documents to you before signing?" I hesitated. "He told me it was just in case of emergency, and I wanted to trust him. I thought it was normal." Angela turned one page, then another. Her jaw tightened. "Margaret," she said gently, "this isn't simplification. This is a full transfer of authority. Power of attorney, yes, but also financial access, shared asset control, and," she paused, "you've signed over contingent rights to your retirement accounts and your home." I stared at her. At first, the words didn't land. Then they hit like ice water down my spine. "He said nothing would change," I whispered. Angela leaned forward. "To be clear, this is legal, but it's predatory. You were misled, and I've seen this too many times. Family cloaking control in the name of help." That word, help. How many times had I heard it? "We just want to help you, Mom. You're lucky to have us helping you out. If we didn't help, who would?" It was never about help. It was about ownership. Angela didn't sugarcoat it. "You've been financially compromised, and if your son or daughter-in-law wanted to, they could sell that house from under you." I pressed my hands together tightly. "But I moved out. I live in an apartment now." Angela blinked. "You don't own this apartment. You're still listed as a resident of your former home, and your bank accounts are still linked." It felt like my breath had been kicked out of me. I'd given them everything, my husband's business profits, my savings, my trust, and they'd turned it into leverage. I wasn't family to them. I was a loophole. Angela continued. "We can contest this. It will take time and documentation, but we can start separating you from this agreement and reasserting your independence." I nodded slowly, not because I understood everything, but because I understood enough. On my way out, Angela handed me a checklist. "Start here. New bank account, pension redirection, utility notices in your name only. It's tedious, but it's the beginning of taking your name back." That word sat heavy in my chest. Taking my name back. I drove home in silence, the kind that didn't feel lonely anymore, just clear. When I walked in, my phone lit up with a missed call from Paul. Another voicemail. No doubt another version of, "Just come back already." Not once had he asked if I was okay. Not once had he said, "I'm sorry." Instead, all his messages sounded like someone annoyed that his tool went missing. Not a mother, a tool. That night, I sipped tea with Irene in her living room. She hadn't asked what happened at the lawyer. She just waited. Finally, I told her everything. When I finished, she shook her head. I had a feeling. I didn't want to say it. "But Margaret, I've watched you disappear in your own life. But now I had a list, a lawyer, a friend, and a name I was ready to reclaim. I wasn't their quiet little burden anymore. I was a woman, rebuilding her foundation, brick by painful brick. The next morning, I didn't hit snooze. I didn't stare at the ceiling and wonder if I should call Paul. That voice, the one that used to whisper, "Be the bigger person," was finally quiet. Instead, I got dressed in jeans and my favorite gray sweater, grabbed Angela's checklist, and walked straight into the bank like I still had a name that meant something. I was done waiting for permission to own my life. It took almost 2 hours to explain everything, to prove who I was, to show I wasn't merging accounts or streamlining finances. I was disentangling myself from a web I should have never been caught in. The banker was kind but cautious. "You understand that opening a new account will change how your pension and direct deposits are handled?" she asked. "That's the idea," I said plainly. She paused. "Would you like to list a secondary account holder?" I shook my head. "Not anymore." She nodded once, then quietly got to work. By noon, my pension was rerouted. By 2 p.m., I had a debit card in my name and a paper receipt showing the first bit of money that was truly mine in years. No one could see it, but inside me something stood taller, firmer, like my spine had remembered it had a purpose. I left the bank and walked next door to the little cafe Irene liked. We always shared tea here after church, and today I needed her steadiness more than ever. She was already seated by the window when I arrived, her scarf draped over the chair like a welcome sign. "I did it," I told her, sitting down. "New account, pension's mine again." She smiled. Not big, not dramatic, just warm. "That's good," she said, pouring my tea. "I feel guilty," I admitted. "And angry, and relieved, all at once. Is that normal?" Irene leaned back and looked at me carefully. "You gave them everything, and they took more. You're allowed to feel all of it." We sat in silence for a moment before she asked, "Have you told them?" "No," I said. "They don't deserve to know every step. They only called when they needed me. I can keep that same energy." She laughed. "Now that's the Margaret the first remember." I smiled too, but it faded quickly, because I couldn't stop thinking about what they'd been saying behind my back all this time. And it didn't take long before I found out. That evening, while folding laundry, I got a text from a friend at church. "Have you seen what Lacey posted?" I hadn't, but I looked. And there it was, on her social media feed, tucked between photos of brunch and their remodeled bathroom. Taking care of elderly isn't a blessing. It's a burden no one warns you about. Gratitude would be nice once in a while. My hands clenched before I even realized it. She didn't tag me. She didn't have to. Everyone who knew us would connect the dots. Everyone who smiled at me in the pews, who'd brought casseroles when Richard passed, who asked how my beautiful family was doing. They'd see this and wonder what I did to deserve it. It was meant to humiliate me, silently, publicly. And I'll admit, it worked, for 5 full minutes. Until I remembered something. I didn't belong to them anymore. I didn't owe silence to people who used it as a shield. I closed the app, placed my phone face down, and opened my journal. That's when the words came, steady and clear, like they'd been waiting all along. "I am not returning to be anyone's burden. I am claiming my dignity." I underlined it twice. And then I wrote one more thing, in all caps. "No one WHO loves you should make you feel small." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I slept like someone who finally remembered where her worth lived. The next morning, I didn't even glance at my phone. I had no appetite for filtered lies or performative sympathy. What I needed was paper, ink, and proof. I got dressed, made black tea strong enough to wake the dead, and pulled out the small accordion file Angela had given me labeled Documentation Phase. I'd spent years keeping receipts for groceries, birthday cards, utilities I paid in their names, thinking it was just part of being a good mother. Now I realized I was quietly funding my own erasure. Angela had warned me, if we're going to challenge financial control, we need a record, a clean, cold timeline. So I sat down at my kitchen table and did what I'd done for everyone else my whole life. I kept track, bank statements with my name missing, utility bills forwarded to their home, signed documents I barely remembered reading, a copy of the title from Richard's business, sold to fund Paul's dream, no repayment, not even acknowledgement. And then I found something that stopped my breath, a notarized document dated 6 months after I moved out, naming Paul and Lacey as authorized occupants of the house. The house I had spent 40 years turning into a home, The one they swore I still technically owned. It wasn't even the deception that burned. It was the gall, to use my name to gain control and then frame me as the burden. By noon, I had a stack of paperwork an inch thick. All of it added up to one hard truth. I'd been misled, not just emotionally, but financially, legally, systematically. And still, they expected me to keep showing up with warm smiles and store-bought cookies. Not anymore. I packed everything into a labeled folder, Estate Reclamation, Margaret A. Fielding, and brought it to Angela's office. She didn't look surprised, just sad. "You were generous," she said after scanning the documents, "and they counted on your silence to stay in control." I nodded, jaw tight. "Well, I'm not silent anymore." She smiled, just a little. "You've done half the work already. The next steps are legal filings and notifying all connected agencies. Once your pension is secured and your banking is independent, we can start separating your name from their household entirely." There it was, separate. The word felt heavy and holy. Not lonely, clean. Angela gave me a form to sign, a formal challenge to revoke the power of attorney. It was long, wordy, full of legalese. But one line stayed with me. Subject no longer consents to familial fiduciary control on the basis of undue influence. That's what I'd been living under, undue influence. I signed. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a mother, or a grandmother, or someone's old responsibility. I felt like a woman who remembered she was a whole person before she was anyone's anything. As I left Angela's office, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Paul. Again, I didn't listen to it. I didn't need to. He was probably saying the same thing he'd said a dozen times in the past month. "Just come back already. You're being dramatic." But this wasn't drama. This was declaration. That night, Irene came over for dinner. She brought soup and stories. We sat by the window, watching the wind rattle the bare trees, sipping from mismatched mugs like two teenagers playing grown-up. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You seem lighter." "I let go," I said simply. "Of them?" I shook my head. "Of needing them to care." She nodded. "That's the hardest part." I looked out the window. My reflection stared back, soft and firm all at once. "I don't need them to care," I said. "I just need them to know I'm not afraid anymore." And I meant it. The next week passed like a quiet thunderstorm. Steady movement, rumbling change, no one quite realizing just how much was shifting under the surface. I was still working at the library 2 days a week, shelving paperbacks, sorting returns, making tea in the staff lounge. There was something healing in that order. No chaos, no guilt, no passive-aggressive silence, just names alphabetized and stories exactly where they were meant to be. My own story? It was just beginning its second chapter. Then came the day that told me they'd noticed. It started with a phone call. Not from Paul, from Emily, a woman I'd known for years through church socials and holiday potlucks. She had that voice people use when they're about to say something that'll hurt, but swear they mean well. "Margaret, have you seen Lacey's latest post?" My stomach tightened. "No." I stopped looking. There was a pause. "I thought maybe you should know. People are starting to ask questions." Curiosity itched at me, so I opened my phone, tapped through the familiar little blue icon, and there it was. People think, quote, grandparents are built-in babysitters. They don't see the sacrifice, the emotional toll, the constant demands. Taking care of someone else's past while building your own future? Exhausting. Sometimes love feels like an invoice no one plans to pay. The caption sat beneath a perfectly filtered selfie of Lacey holding a glass of wine on their back porch, feet propped up, Paul in the background grilling something for a family night. The comments were worse. "OMG. I totally get it. Caretaking is so thankless. You're so strong. Some people just drain the joy out of life. Is this about your MIL? That woman always seemed intense." My name wasn't there, but my shadow was. I stared at that screen for a long time. Not because it surprised me, but because of what didn't surprise me at all. I had spent years twisting myself into quiet shapes just to avoid this exact moment. And it happened anyway. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I wrote back. Not publicly, but in truth. I sat down, pulled out a pen and paper, and wrote Lacey a letter, not to convince her, not to argue, but to speak plainly. You don't owe me love, but you do owe me honesty. And if you ever truly felt burdened by my presence, you had every right to say so. Instead, you chose performance over conversation, pity over truth, and pity poisons the well faster than hate. I carried the weight of 3 generations so you could build your version of a family. If that's too inconvenient to remember, then forget me entirely. Because I've remembered myself. I sealed the envelope. I didn't sign it with "Love Mom" or "Warm Regards," just my name, Margaret A. Fielding. Because I'm not a character in their version of the story anymore. I mailed it the next morning. And then I went back to the library and reshelved the autobiography section with a strange sense of poetic irony. By noon, my lawyer had filed the final batch of documents: estate separation, legal notices, and asset reversion. Angela called me with a simple update. It's all official now. You're independent. That word rang louder than church bells. Independent. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea, pulled out my journal, and wrote one line. The fire they lit behind me didn't burn me. It burned the bridge I used to crawl across to beg for scraps. I don't cross that bridge anymore. I don't knock on that door. And I don't ask questions that already answered themselves through years of silence. What I do now is live, clean, quiet, free. And quiet doesn't mean forgotten. It means they'll hear the echo of my absence every time they call and I don't answer. It was a Thursday when I rewrote my will. There was no ceremony, no trembling hands, just me, a warm cardigan, and a deep understanding that nothing in this life is owed to those who traded love for leverage. Angela had booked a quiet room at the local notary office. It smelled like coffee and old file folders. Fitting, really. These were the kinds of places where real shifts happened. Not in grand speeches or dramatic scenes, but here, at a laminate desk under fluorescent lights where truth gets signed in black ink. She laid out the documents carefully. This will revoke any prior arrangements, she explained, and you're free to name your new beneficiaries as you see fit. I nodded, calm as still water. The first line. To whom it may concern. The following testament reflects the wishes of Margaret Ann Fielding, of sound mind and full legal authority. I scanned each line slowly. Angela had done well. My son's name was nowhere in it. Nor Lacey's. They had already inherited enough of me in life. My time, my money, my willingness to stay small so they could stand taller. Now, they would receive nothing from what I rebuilt. Instead, I left everything to 2 places. The women's shelter of Elm County, where I used to volunteer before Richard got sick, and my granddaughter, Emily Kate Fielding, who once whispered to me on her 12th birthday, "I like talking to you better than anyone." At the time, I thought she was just being sweet. Now I see she was the only one who ever really looked at me like a whole person. Angela paused when I handed the pen back. Are you sure? Yes, I said without hesitation. They loved my money more than me. That's not love. The notary stamped the final page. It echoed like a closing door. When I stepped outside, the wind caught my scarf and wrapped it around my neck like a blessing. The sky was gray, the air damp, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I walked to the cafe down the street and bought myself a lemon scone and a cup of chamomile tea. Sat by the window. Didn't rush. Let the silence settle around me, not like a punishment, but like a reward. That night, I got a text from Emily. "Grandma, why did you disappear?" I stared at the screen for a long time. She wasn't part of this mess, but she was tangled in it. A quiet casualty of adult manipulation, torn loyalties, whispered judgments over dinner tables she was too young to understand. I wrote back, "I didn't disappear, sweetheart. I just stopped showing up where I was only tolerated, not treasured. I'm still here. When you're ready, I'll be waiting, with tea and time." She responded with a single emoji, a heart. It was enough. After that, I sat by the window and wrote in my journal, "My silence is no longer their comfort. It is my armor." Because for years, I'd kept quiet to keep the peace. But peace that requires erasing yourself? That's not peace. That's control with a polite mask. Now, I don't ask if they miss me, because I know what they miss. They miss the version of me who answered every call, cleaned up every mess, signed every paper with blind trust. They don't miss me. They miss the access. And now that it's gone, let them sit in the silence. Easter Sunday arrived like any other, quiet, cloudy, still. But I wasn't dressing for church. I wasn't bringing a casserole to anyone's table. I was putting on my best coat, the one Richard used to say made me look like I ran the town. And maybe, in some small way now, I did. Because today, I wasn't going to be passive. Today, I was delivering truth. I slipped a thick envelope into my purse. Inside was everything they thought I'd never have the strength or clarity to do. A notarized revocation of power of attorney, legal confirmation of my financial and residential separation, a copy of my updated will, a handwritten letter detailing every act of betrayal, from the hidden documents to the condescending posts to the smug silence when I walked out that Christmas night. I didn't write it for reconciliation. I wrote it for closure. No more guessing. No more, maybe they didn't know how much it hurt. They knew now. I parked 2 houses down. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted finality. The driveway was full. Of course. Holiday brunch, no doubt. Lacey probably made her lemon tart, and Paul would have picked up pre-cut ham and tried to pass it off as effort. For a moment, I almost laughed. The image of them sipping champagne while that envelope sat like a fuse in the hallway made something cold and satisfied unfurl inside me. I crept up the walkway quietly, tucked the envelope into the crack between the door and the frame, and walked away without looking back. Let them open it when the party died down. Let them read every line and realize I hadn't just left their house. I had left their hold on me. By the time I got home, I was shaking. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. Irene called later that evening. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I did it," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. "I gave them the last thing I ever will." She didn't ask what it was. She just whispered, "I'm proud of you." I sat on my couch, looking at the empty corner where their family portraits used to hang. I'd taken them down weeks ago, not in anger, in liberation. There's a difference between burning bridges and realizing some were only held up by your willingness to carry the weight. I made tea. I opened my window. The church bells rang faintly in the distance, reminding me that resurrection didn't just belong to Jesus. Some of us were resurrecting our self-worth. I opened my journal. They will never be able to say I left without telling them why. They just never believed I'd mean it. Later that night, my phone lit up. Paul. I didn't answer. He didn't leave a voicemail. Of course he didn't. His silence was always louder than his guilt. But I knew he read the letter. How? Because at 11:47 p.m., Lacey posted a quote to her feed. Some people twist the narrative to play victim. Just remember who was there when they had nothing. No context. No name. But I knew. And for once, I didn't feel hurt. I felt confirmed. When the truth threatens their image, they don't correct themselves. They smear you, hoping the stain will spread wide enough to cover their own rot. But this time, I wasn't scrambling to explain. I didn't reply. I didn't defend. I didn't text Emily to ask what was being said. Because I didn't need the last word. I had already delivered it, with a signature. And from now on, if they want to find me, they'll have to reach across a silence they created. And I won't be the one to break it. 3 days after Easter, he showed up. I was at the library, halfway through shelving a stack of historical biographies, when I heard the door open behind me with a forceful clang, louder than necessary. I didn't turn around at first, but I felt it. That old pressure that used to sit between my shoulders every time Paul walked in angry and entitled. "Mom!" He didn't say it kindly. He said it like a warning. I turned slowly. There he was, my son, 41 years old, red-faced, nostrils flared, still dressing like a man who believed the world owed him grace for simply waking up in the morning. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't sit down. He just barked. You need to undo this insanity. I blinked, keeping my voice level. Which part exactly? You're trying to punish us like some martyr. What is this? He snapped, holding up a crumpled copy of my letter. You left this like a landmine. Lacey was in tears. I almost laughed. Lacey, in tears. Imagine that. The woman who once mocked my worn-out shoes in front of Emily because Grandma doesn't know how to dress her age. I set the book in my hand gently onto the cart. If Lacey's in tears, it must be because she's realizing I meant every word. Paul took a step closer. You made us look like villains. I kept my voice steady. No, Paul. You acted like villains. I just stopped covering for it. That did it. He went redder. His voice dropped low, sharp. You don't get to take away everything and act like it's righteous. I crossed my arms. You don't get to rewrite what you never respected. Around us, the library was silent. The few patrons nearby kept their heads down, but I knew they were listening. Good. Let them hear how sons talk to the women who built their worlds out of nothing but casseroles, closed mouths, and too many second chances. He pointed at me, hand shaking. We took care of you. We included you, and now you're making us look like abusers. My laugh came fast, too fast. You took my house. You took my accounts. You made me sign things I didn't understand, and called it love. You let your wife humiliate me in my own living room. And you're standing here angry because I finally put a stop to it. He stepped back, shocked, like he hadn't realized I could still speak. I took a breath, sharp and clean. Let me be clear, Paul. I am not your dependent. I am not your legacy. I am not a placeholder for your guilt. And I am not coming back. He stood there, stunned. Then, like always, he tried the oldest card in his deck. He lowered his voice, forced to tremble. So this is it? You're just cutting us off? Over a few misunderstandings? My hands didn't shake when I answered. No, son. I'm cutting myself free. And I hope someday you understand the difference. I turned away, just like that, because I didn't need to say more. I had already given him years of silence, sacrifice, and swallowed pride. This was the first thing I'd said that actually reached him. He left without another word, and I stood there, spine straight, hands calm. Later, one of the younger librarians passed me a sticky note with a soft smile. It said, "You're stronger than I think your family ever deserved." I folded it and slipped it into my coat pocket. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "He came expecting the old me, bent, unsure, half apologizing, but the new me was already standing. And she wasn't stepping aside ever again." I thought the confrontation at the library would be the end. But when they realize control is slipping, people like Lacey don't just let go, they launch. 3 days later, I woke to a buzzing phone. 3 missed calls. 2 messages from Irene. "Hey, you might want to look at Facebook." And 1 email from the church board secretary with the subject line, "Concerned message from Paul and Lacey Fielding." I didn't even flinch. I opened Facebook first. There it was. A post from Lacey. Long, wordy, all lowercase, like she thought formatting made her seem humble. It breaks our hearts to see how division can creep into even the closest families. Some people rewrite the past to excuse their absence in the present. All we ever tried to do was help. Not everyone wants to be helped, I guess. Below that, a photo of her and Paul with Emily, smiling, all dressed in pastels. Easter brunch, cropped just right. You'd never know that just days before, I delivered the single letter that dismantled their illusion of control. Then the email from the church secretary. "Margaret, I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. Paul and Lacey say they're worried about your well-being, and they've asked if we could arrange someone to check in on you weekly. Of course, we would never impose, but please let us know if you're okay." I sat back in my chair, letting the words settle. They were trying to flip the script, paint me as unstable, isolated, a poor, elderly woman gone off course. They weren't retaliating. They were concerned enough to block me from Emily's school account, concerned enough to publicly frame me as bitter, concerned enough to whisper behind closed doors that Mom's not herself anymore. But here's the thing about silence. When you stop trying to defend yourself, people start listening to what you don't say. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't make a post. I didn't tell my side in the comments section. Instead, I called the local news, not to expose them, but to tell my own story. The journalist was a young woman named Claire who'd recently started a feature series called Second Act Women, highlighting women over 60 finding strength after betrayal, reinvention, or loss. She listened. She didn't interrupt. And when I finished, she looked at me with a kind of reverence I wasn't used to receiving. "Would you be willing to do a video testimony?" she asked. "We can protect your name, but your story could really help others." I nodded. Not for revenge, but for clarity. Because I knew if I didn't say it out loud, truthfully, calmly, undeniably, they'd keep controlling the narrative. The video aired a week later. Just a 5-minute clip, black and white. Me sitting in my living room. No dramatics. No tears. Just this. When people say family first, they rarely mean the elder. They mean the ones loud enough to be heard. But quiet doesn't mean weak. It means I took the time to think before I walked away. And once I walked, I didn't turn back. It spread further than I expected. I got letters. Notes in the mail from women in similar shoes. One woman sent me a handmade bookmark that said, "They only miss you when they can't use you." 2 Sundays later, at church, the same people who once echoed Lacey's pity-laced narrative now smiled at me with something closer to apology. Irene leaned over during the final hymn. "They tried to ruin your name," she whispered, "but you gave yourself a louder one." That night, I wrote, "When they couldn't control me, they tried to control the story, but my silence said more than their smear ever could." And I smiled, for real this time. It was the first Thursday in May when the knock came. I wasn't expecting anyone. No mail carrier knocks, no delivery trucks this late. I paused with my book halfway in my lap, then stood and opened the door. Carefully, quietly. There she was, Emily, 16 now, taller than I remembered. Her brown curls tied back, face serious. No fake smile, no practiced sweetness, just her, alone. She clutched a tote bag, wore sneakers too clean for walking far, and looked at me like she wasn't sure if I'd even let her in. "Hi," she said. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. She walked past me, slowly, scanning the apartment like it was a museum exhibit of a woman she'd once known but hadn't really understood. I shut the door. She turned. "They told me you left because you were bitter, that you were mad we didn't give you attention." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked softly, "Is that what you believed?" She swallowed. "No, not really, but it was easier than asking what was true." I nodded, because I knew that feeling all too well. She sat on the couch, pulled a small notebook from her bag, and opened it. "I watched your video," she said. "At school, someone sent it to me. I didn't even know it was you at first, but then you said that part. Quiet doesn't mean weak." And I knew. Silence hung between us like a peace offering. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not looking at me, "for everything I didn't ask." "You were a child," I said. "It wasn't your job to see what the adults hid." She looked up then, eyes glassy. "I want to be here. With you. Not for a visit. For a while." My heart thudded, careful and hopeful. "They'll be furious," I said. Not to scare her, but to make sure she knew. "I know," she said, "but I'm tired of pretending they're right, just because they're loud." She pulled out her phone and showed me her last message to Lacey. "If I grow up and treat people the way you treat Grandma, then I've learned nothing worth keeping." I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that only comes when something heavy finally shifts. "I have a spare room," I said, "and an extra toothbrush in the cabinet, if you're sure." "I'm sure." And just like that, she moved in. No fanfare, no luggage, just a borrowed duffel bag and a girl ready to learn what strength looks like when it's gentle, consistent, and free. That night, we made dinner together. Soup and grilled cheese. Nothing fancy, but it tasted like a new beginning. Afterward, she helped me tidy the kitchen. I caught her looking at the old photo I kept on the fridge, her as a baby. me holding her with wide, tired eyes. "I don't remember this," she said. "I do," I replied. "You cried every time I tried to put you down." "So I just didn't." She smiled at that, quietly. Later, we sat on the couch with mugs of tea and mismatched socks. She asked questions. Real ones. "When did you know they weren't going to change?" "When I realized they didn't want to." She nodded slowly. "I think I needed to see someone walk away to believe I could too." And that's when I realized something. This wasn't just about reclaiming my life. It was about showing her what not settling looked like. I opened my journal that night and wrote, "She didn't come to rescue me. She came because she finally recognized the truth. And together, we're building something real, out of honesty, not guilt." The next morning, she made coffee. And I smiled. Because now, I wasn't just surviving. I was passing the torch. I didn't hear from Paul or Lacey for 3 days. Not a call, not a knock, not even one of their vague, poisoned posts. But silence from manipulative people is never peace. It's preparation. And sure enough, on the 4th morning, Emily came into the kitchen holding her phone, pale-faced. "They're saying you brainwashed me." I looked up from my tea. "Who's they?" She hesitated. "Dad, Mom, my aunt, some cousins." I sighed. Of course they are. Because in their world, truth is never allowed to stand on its own. It must be edited, discredited, reframed through tears and tantrums until it no longer threatens their comfort. Emily sat across from me, eyes wide with quiet fury. "They said you're manipulating me for attention." I couldn't help it. I laughed. A dry, tired laugh. "I gave them attention for 40 years. They never learned to live without it." She tilted her head, confused. "You're not mad?" "I'm done being mad," I said. "That was the price of needing them. And I don't need them anymore." Emily looked down at her tea. "Do you want me to block them?" "No. Let them look. Let them wonder." Because what scared them most wasn't that I left. It was that I never looked back. They kept pushing out narratives like wet cement, trying to set the shape of their innocence before the truth hardened in someone else's hands. But I had already poured my foundation. And Emily? She'd stepped onto it willingly. That afternoon, I received a letter. Not handwritten, not kind, typed, legal-looking. A formal request for family mediation, signed by a lawyer I didn't know. Inside were vague accusations. Concerns about the emotional influence being exerted over Emily. Margaret Fielding's erratic behavior and recent public commentary. Possibility of elder instability affecting inheritance decisions. It was laughable. If it hadn't been so venomously intentional. They weren't just trying to reclaim control. They were trying to paint me as unstable, ungrateful, unfit. I handed the envelope to Angela at our next meeting. She read it twice, then placed it gently on her desk like it was rotting fruit. "Desperation," she said. "You've cut their access, so they're attacking your credibility." "Can they do anything?" I asked. "No," she said, calm as ever. "You've made every decision legally, with clarity and in writing, but I'll respond formally, just to show them you're not alone." That night, I told Emily everything. Every clause I signed, every step I took, every moment I second-guessed myself until I didn't anymore. She listened, all of it. When I finished, she hugged me, not out of pity, out of respect. "Whatever they say," she whispered, "it's not louder than what I see here." And that was it, wasn't it? For so long, I'd tried to explain myself to people who never wanted to understand me. Now, I didn't have to explain anything. The life I lived proved it. By the time summer rolled in, they had tried everything. Shaming me publicly, discrediting me legally, using Emily as a pawn, painting themselves as the exhausted heroes who tried so hard. But the more they yelled, the quieter I became. And the quieter I became, the more people noticed them. Not me. Because nothing unnerves manipulative people more than when the person they built their control around suddenly goes still. They thought my peace meant they still had time to fix the optics. It didn't. It meant I had already closed the door. And then came the moment they realized it for real. It happened at the library. Again. I was at the front desk, returning from break, when I heard a familiar voice barking at one of the volunteers. I know she works here. I just want 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I didn't even have to look. Paul. I stepped into view, and the whole room stilled. He looked worse than before. Eyes sunken, hair a mess, sleeves rolled halfway like he'd come from somewhere in a rush but couldn't decide what for. When he saw me, he actually smiled. A forced, desperate thing that reminded me of every moment I mistook noise for sincerity. "Mom," he said, walking forward, hands out like we were still playing pretend. "Let's talk, please, just us." I kept my distance. "I've said all I needed to say." His smile cracked. "So that's it? You just throw your family away?" "No," I said calmly. "I stopped handing it to people who used it like currency." He looked around, suddenly aware of the eyes on us. "This doesn't need to be a scene." "Then stop making one," I cut in. "Because every time you show up uninvited, all you prove is how little you respect boundaries." The volunteer behind the desk cleared her throat. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Paul looked at me, truly looked, and I could see the moment the reality sank in. He had no hold left, no leverage, no secrets I was still ashamed of, no fear he could manipulate. He stepped back, muttering, "You've changed." And I smiled, soft but unflinching. "No, you just never thought I'd stop giving you the best of me when you kept offering the worst of yourself." He turned and walked out without another word. That night, I dreamt of nothing. Not them, not the past, just stillness, which, for once, wasn't empty. That night, I wrote the final entry in a new journal. The one I'd started the day I signed the papers, removing Paul and Lacey from my will. The snow is falling. My tea is warm. My name is mine again. And for the first time in my life, I don't miss anyone who let me walk away. And I didn't. Not even a little. Because freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through falling snow. You did the right thing. And this time, I listened.